5 years ago, the night was cold and the crowd was not. Mara remembered that detail with the particular clarity that only humiliation produces. The temperature had dropped sharply at dusk, frost forming at the edges of the Iron Veil Pack ceremonial square, her breath visible in small clouds in the torchlight. But the pack surrounding her on all sides had been warm with something she could only describe, looking back, as appetite. The specific hunger of a community that has found its sacrifice and is relieved it isn't them. She had been 18 years old. She had not cried. They kicked me out for being wolfless. Now they bow to my wolf. A story about a girl who was declared nothing by the people who were supposed to protect her. Who was thrown out of the only home she knew, at 18 years old, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the sound of a pack laughing at her back. A story about what happens when you survive what was supposed to destroy you, and then you come home. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back. I am so glad you are here. Before we begin, I need to know, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your city, your country, even just your continent in the comments below, because this community is everywhere and I love knowing where this story is landing. And how are you? Honestly, how are you doing today? Because this story is for anyone who has ever been told they weren't enough, by someone who had no idea what they were looking at. I see you. And I think you're going to love what happens next. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do it right now. It is free, it costs you nothing, and it means that every new story finds you automatically instead of you having to go looking. Hit that notification bell too. We have something very special happening on this channel and I do not want you to miss a single chapter. Okay. Now, let me tell you about Mara Voss. And what she became after they threw her away. Mara Voss, Alpha Derek had said, his voice carrying the ritual weight of a ceremony he'd clearly rehearsed. You have reached the age of manifestation and your wolf has not come. The examination has been conducted by our pack healers and the result is confirmed. You are wolfless. Without a wolf, you have no place in this pack, no rank, no rights, and no claim to Iron Veil territory. He had paused then. She remembered that pause. He had looked at her with something that wasn't quite contempt and wasn't quite pity and was worse than either, the look of a man disposing of something that had simply failed to be useful. You are hereby exiled. You will leave this territory before dawn. You will not return. Mara had looked at the crowd. Had looked for one face in particular. Jade had been standing 3 rows back. Her best friend of 12 years. The girl who had shared her bed during thunderstorms and her food during lean winters and every secret she had ever had. Jade had been looking at the ground. Not at Mara. At the ground. That had been the one moment where the tears almost came. Not the exile. Not Derek's practiced contempt. Jade, looking at the ground. Mara had picked up her bag, they had allowed her one bag, and walked out of the gates of Iron Veil Pack without looking back. She had been walking, in one form or another, ever since. Until now. You've gone quiet, Zed said. He was driving. He always drove when she needed to think, which she had come to understand was one of the approximately 10,000 ways he showed care that weren't the word care. The roads into Iron Veil territory were narrow and forested and the morning light came through the trees in the particular slanted way that meant late autumn, which meant she had been gone for exactly 5 years and 3 weeks. I'm remembering, Mara said. Do you want to talk about it? No. Okay. That was Zed. 3 letters. Warm and present and entirely without pressure. She had once told him that his economy with words was either the most respectful thing she'd ever experienced or deeply suspicious, and he had said probably both, and she had laughed for the first time in longer than she could remember. She looked at him now. Alpha King Zed Callahan, the most powerful wolf alive, ruler of every territory she had ever heard of and several she hadn't, drove a very ordinary vehicle and was currently wearing a jacket with a small coffee stain on the sleeve that she had pointed out twice and that he had apparently decided was not his problem. His wolf was enormous and ancient and had recognized hers the first time they were in the same room with the quiet certainty of something finding its other half after a very long time. He had not told her what she was. Had waited for her to discover it herself. Had simply stayed close, consistently, until she did. She still wasn't entirely sure she deserved him. She was, however, completely sure that the pack currently 40 kilometers ahead of them had no idea what was coming. The message from her mother had been brief. 3 lines, her handwriting shakier than Mara remembered. I am unwell. I did not want to tell you. I am telling you now because I think I must. Her mother, who had been stripped of her rank the day Mara was exiled. Who had been moved to the edge of the territory, given the smallest home, assigned the lowest work. Who had paid for her daughter's wolflessness with 5 years of quiet, grinding humiliation and had not once written to complain about it. Who had written now, which meant it was serious. Mara's wolf stirred. She felt it the way she always felt it, not as a separate creature, exactly, but as a depth below her own consciousness that had been there since she was born and had simply been waiting for her to be strong enough to reach it. The ancient wolf. That was what Elder Ruth had called it in the texts she'd found during her exile, the ones that described exactly one other case in recorded wolf history. A primordial spirit. The first wolves, before packs, before hierarchy, before any of the structures that modern wolf society had built on top of what used to be something older and wilder and considerably more absolute. She had been 18 when they called her wolfless. She had been 20 when the wolf first spoke to her in a forest 3 territories away from everyone who knew her name. She had been 21 when she understood what she was. 22 when she learned to carry it without it carrying her. She was 23 now. And the ancient wolf, as she crossed into Iron Vale territory for the first time in 5 years, was very, very awake. Something just happened, Zed said quietly. She's aware we're here, Mara said. I noticed. He glanced at her with those dark eyes that always saw more than she'd told him. How are you feeling? Clear, Mara said. And she was. The clarity that came with the ancient wolf was one of the things she had never found a way to describe to anyone who hadn't felt it. Everything simplified. Everything that wasn't essential fell away and what remained was exactly what it was, no more and nothing less. She was here for her mother. She was here because the pack that had thrown her away had made her mother pay for it, and that was the one thing she had never been willing to leave unaddressed. Everything else, the reckoning, the recognition, the bowing, that wasn't why she'd come. That was just what was going to happen. The border checkpoint came into view. 2 pack guards, young wolves she didn't recognize, standing at the gate with the routine alertness of wolves who weren't expecting anything unusual on a Tuesday morning in late autumn. They were about to have an unusual Tuesday morning. Mara felt the exact moment her ancient wolf's presence reached them. It moved ahead of her like a weather front, not aggressive, not threatening, just absolutely, primordially present. The kind of presence that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. Because every wolf instinct developed over millennia of evolution was suddenly and involuntarily responding to something that predated all of them. The guards went still. Not frozen, still. The particular stillness of a wolf whose body has understood something before their mind has caught up. Zed slowed the vehicle. Stopped at the gate. 1 guard approached. Got within 3 meters. Stopped again. His eyes found Mara's through the windshield and she watched his wolf recognize hers the way a candle recognizes a bonfire, not as a threat, not as competition, but as something fundamentally, categorically different in kind. His knees bent. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just the involuntary response of a wolf's body to something ancient, bowing the way grass bows to wind. The guard didn't even seem to fully realize he was doing it. The second guard, watching, did the same. Mara looked at the gate of Iron Vale Pack, the gate she had walked out of at 18 with 1 bag and the sound of a pack's indifference at her back, and felt the ancient wolf settle in her chest like something returning to a place it had never forgotten. Ready? Zed asked. Mara looked at the gate. At the guard still half kneeling without understanding why. At the territory that had decided she was nothing and sent her away to prove it. I've been ready, she said, for 5 years. The gate opened. Mara Voss came home. Iron Vale Pack looked exactly the same. That was the first thing that struck her. 5 years felt like a different lifetime from the inside, but the pack had simply continued, the same timber buildings, the same worn paths between them, the same smell of wood smoke and pine resin and the particular mineral undertone of the river that ran along the eastern boundary. The same. As though the earth hadn't noticed that something enormous had left and come back different. It would notice now. Mara walked through the inner gate with Zed half a step behind her, not protective, not leading, just present, and felt the ancient wolf settle deeper into her body the way it always did on unfamiliar ground. Grounding itself. Taking stock. The first wolf who saw her was a woman she remembered from the market stalls. Petra, middle-ranked, had once told an 8-year-old Mara that she had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, which at the time had felt like an insult and in retrospect was probably the most accurate thing anyone had ever said about her. Petra was carrying a basket of linens and moving with the efficient purposefulness of someone who had somewhere to be. She slowed as Mara approached. Frowned slightly, that particular frown of almost recognition, the face people made when they were certain they knew someone but couldn't place them. Then something else moved through her expression. Something her mind hadn't processed yet but her wolf clearly had. She stepped aside. Not dramatically. Just, aside. Making room in a way that had nothing to do with courtesy and everything to do with instinct. Mara walked past without stopping. It happened again with the two young warriors sparring in the yard near the eastern barracks. They paused mid-exchange, both of them turning toward her with the alert, uncertain look of wolves who had heard something on a frequency just below conscious hearing. One of them straightened from his fighting stance without seeming to decide to. The other lowered his hands. Neither of them knew why. Mara could see it in their faces, the confusion of a body acting on information the mind hadn't been given. They can feel her, Zed said quietly, beside her. They can feel something, Mara said. They don't know what yet. They will. Her mother's house was at the territory's edge, the farthest point from the pack house, the place where rank visibly thinned into something closer to tolerance than belonging. Mara knew this walk. Had grown up doing it in reverse, moving from the margins toward the center every day, trying to make herself central enough that no one would notice she lived at the edge. The house was smaller than she remembered. That happened with childhood homes, they shrank when you came back to them with a grown body and a grown understanding of what small actually meant. But it was tended. Someone had recently repaired the front step. There was a window box with dormant plants that would bloom in spring if anyone was there to see them. Mara stopped at the door. Knocked once. Then said, "Mama." "It's me." Silence. Then footsteps, slower than she remembered, heavier, the gait of someone moving carefully. The door opened. Cora Voss had aged more than 5 years. That was the truth of it, and Mara took it in without flinching because she had learned that the truth deserved to be looked at directly. Her mother's hair had gone mostly silver. Her hands, when they came up to cup Mara's face, were thinner than they used to be. But her eyes were the same, that particular dark amber that Mara had always thought looked like light through autumn leaves, and they were, in this moment, overwhelmed. "You came," Cora said. As though she'd been afraid Mara wouldn't. "I came," Mara said. "I always would have." They held each other in the doorway for a long time. Behind Mara, Zed waited without making a sound, which was one of the things she loved most about him, his understanding that some moments were not his and his complete comfort with that. Inside, with tea made and her mother settled on the worn settee that had been in this house since Mara was an infant, the full picture emerged. Cora's illness was real but not immediately critical, a deep exhaustion that the pack healer had attributed to age and stress and the specific toll of 5 years of diminished rank, of being the mother of the wolfless girl, of carrying that label in a community that valued wolves above everything. "She should have better care," Zed said, his voice level. "Different food, different housing, actual rest. Things she hasn't been given access to at the edge of the territory." "I know," Mara said. Cora looked at Zed with the careful assessment of a mother measuring the man her daughter had arrived with, and then said, with the directness that Mara had clearly inherited, "You're the Alpha King." "Yes," Zed said. "You came here with my daughter." "Yes." "To this pack." "Which exiled her." "Yes." Cora looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then she said, "Good," with a weight that contained 5 years of waiting for something to shift, and turned back to her tea. The commotion started an hour later. Mara heard it before it reached them: voices, the particular sharp frequency of pack communication moving fast, the sound of a community processing something unexpected. She set down her cup and felt the ancient wolf rise in her chest, unhurried, like something surfacing from deep water. Alpha Derek came himself. She gave him that. He didn't send wolves ahead, didn't wait for her to be brought to him. He came to her mother's small house at the edge of his territory with 3 senior pack members at his back and the expression of a man who had received a report he didn't fully believe and had come to see for himself. He stopped in the doorway. He was older too. 5 years older, like everyone, but also something else, the particular aging of an alpha whose pack was not quite thriving. She could feel it through the ancient wolf, the way she could feel the current of anything wolf-related when she was paying attention. Ironvale's pack bond was thinner than it should have been. Less vital. As though something that had been sustaining it quietly from beneath had been removed and no one had identified the source. They had not identified the source. She had been 17 when they exiled her, and the pack had simply continued declining without ever understanding why. "Mara Voss," Derek said. His voice carried the practiced authority of an alpha, but she felt the current beneath it, the uncertainty his face wasn't showing. "You were exiled from this territory. You have no right to." "My mother is ill," Mara said. Pleasantly. "I came to see her." "You are not permitted." Derek. Zed's voice. Quiet. With the particular quality that Mara had come to think of as his actual authority, not performed, not projected, just present, the way gravity was present. "You are speaking to my mate. I'd recommend adjusting your tone." Derek's eyes moved to Zed. Processed. Recognized. The color shifted slightly in his face. He stopped. Looked back at Mara. "You're the Alpha King's mate." "Yes," Mara said. You were wolfless." The examination confirmed. "The examination was wrong," Mara said simply. "Or something else was. We'll be discussing that shortly." She held his gaze. "But first, I'd like you to meet my wolf." She had not planned to do it here. Had thought, in the abstract way she'd been thinking about this return for months, that the full reveal would happen in a more considered setting. With more witnesses. With Elder Ruth present to provide context. But Derek was standing in her mother's doorway with his practiced authority and his uncertain undercurrent, and the wolves with him were radiating the low-grade hostility of pack members backing their alpha, and her mother was sitting on a worn settee looking at 5 years of diminished health and stripped rank, and the ancient wolf had simply decided that now was sufficient. Mara let her wolf surface. Just enough. Not the full shift, just presence. The ancient wolf rising to the surface of her like heat rising from stone, filling the small room with something that had no modern equivalent, something that bypassed conscious thought entirely and spoke directly to the part of every wolf present that was older than language. The effect was immediate. The 3 senior pack members behind Derek went to their knees. Not slowly. Not reluctantly. Their bodies simply responded before their minds could form a position on the matter. Derek lasted 3 seconds longer. She watched him fight it, watched the alpha dominance that had governed this pack for 20 years push back against something it had never encountered and had no framework for resisting. His jaw set. His hands clenched. Then his knees hit the floor. The silence in the room was absolute. Mara looked at Alpha Derek Cross, the man who had stood in a torchlit square and called her wolfless in front of everyone she knew, the man who had sent her away with one bag and no ceremony except the ceremony of rejection, kneeling on her mother's worn floor without having chosen to. "That," she said, very quietly, "is my wolf." From the settee, Cora made a sound. Not a sob. Something older and more private, the sound of a woman who had waited 5 years for something to be seen and was watching it finally, undeniably be seen. The door behind Derek opened wider and a new voice entered the room. Old, female, steady as stone. "I told you," Elder Ruth said, stepping past the kneeling pack members with the unhurried authority of someone who had been right for a very long time and had learned to carry it graciously. 23 years ago, when this child was born, I told every alpha and elder in this pack exactly what her bloodline carried. And 5 years ago, when you exiled her, I told you again. She looked at Derek on the floor without particular satisfaction, more like a teacher looking at a student who had finally, belatedly demonstrated comprehension. Perhaps now we are ready to listen. Through the ancient wolf, Mara felt the pack bond of Iron Veil shift. Fractionally. The way a tide shifts, not dramatic, not immediate, but directional. Moving toward something it had been kept from for 5 years. Moving toward her. Elder Ruth did not hurry. That was the first thing Mara noticed about her after 5 years, the complete absence of urgency in the way she moved, the way she spoke, the way she looked at the kneeling wolves on the floor of Cora's small house with the patient expression of someone who had been waiting for this specific moment for a very long time and had learned, somewhere along the way, that rushing it would only diminish it. She was in her 80s, Elder Ruth. Small and silver-haired and made entirely of angles, sharp jaw, sharp eyes, the particular sharpness of a mind that had been filing things away in careful order for 8 decades and could retrieve any of it in seconds. She had been the pack's oldest living historian when Mara was born. She was that still, plus 23 additional years of being right about things no one had listened to. Up, she said to the kneeling pack members, with the brisk efficiency of someone tidying a room. On your feet. You may kneel again later if you feel strongly about it, but right now I need the floor clear. Derek rose with the effortful dignity of a man reclaiming something he wasn't certain he still held. The 3 senior wolves behind him were faster, which Mara noted. Ruth settled herself in Cora's second chair, the one that had always been there for guests, positioned near the window, with the ease of someone who had sat in it before. She looked at Mara with those sharp eyes that missed nothing and said, simply, "Show me." Mara let the ancient wolf surface again. The same way as before, presence, not shift. The room responded the way rooms always did, that collective stillness, that involuntary orientation toward her, that sense of something vast and old filling a space that was technically too small for it. Ruth looked at it for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, with the expression of a woman whose research had just been confirmed. "Sit down, everyone," Ruth said. "This is going to take a moment and some of you are going to find it difficult." They sat. Mara took the place beside her mother on the settee, close enough that their arms touched. Zed stood near the door, present, unhurried, watching everything. Before Pax, Ruth began, with the cadence of someone who had told a story so many times it had worn smooth, before alphas and betas and ranks and territories and all the structures we have built to manage what we are, there were just wolves. The first ones. The original spirits. Ancient wolves, Mara said. Ancient wolves, Ruth confirmed. Though they didn't need a name then. They were simply what wolves were, before wolves became something smaller and more organized. They carried the full weight of what wolf nature actually is, not the diluted version we pass down through bloodlines now, but the original thing. Undivided. Unranked. Absolutely sovereign. Derek made a sound. Ruth looked at him. "You have a question," she said. "They're extinct," Derek said. "Ancient wolves. That's not, it's mythology. Pack historians classify it as. Pack historians classify it as mythology because the last confirmed case was 400 years ago and the documentation was lost in the Iron Veil archive fire of 1743, which I have always suspected was not entirely accidental." Ruth's voice carried no particular heat. Just precision. "I have the surviving copies. I have had them for 60 years. I presented them to this pack's elder council when Mara was born and I was told, very politely, that I was romanticizing an old bloodline." Her eyes moved to Derek. "Your father was on that council. As was mine." Silence. "An ancient wolf doesn't manifest the way a normal wolf does," Ruth continued. "At puberty, at the usual time, the body isn't ready. The ancient wolf is not a spirit that fits inside an 18-year-old, regardless of how strong that young person is. It waits. It incubates. And while it waits, it presents to every external examination as nothing. Wolfless, Mara said. Wolfless, Ruth said. Every test, every reading, every healer's examination will confirm it. Because they're looking for a wolf of the kind they know. And this, she gestured toward Mara, toward the ancient wolf's presence still quietly filling the room, is not a wolf of the kind they know. It is something altogether older. The instruments don't register it because the instruments were built for something else. Cora made a sound beside Mara. Almost a word. Mara took her hand. She knew, Mara said quietly. My mother knew. Didn't you, Mama? It wasn't entirely a question. Cora's hand tightened on hers. I suspected. From the time you were very small. Her voice was careful, the way voices were when carrying something heavy. You were always different. The way animals responded to you. The way pack arguments quieted when you entered a room, even as a child. I didn't know what it meant, Ruth told me when you were 3. And then when the manifestation age came and nothing happened, She stopped. You watched them exile me, Mara said. Gentle. Not accusatory. She had done this part of the processing already, in the years between, in the long conversations with herself and occasionally with Zed. She knew her mother's silence at the ceremony had not been indifference. If I had told them what you were, Cora said, they would not have believed me. And if Ruth's documentation hadn't convinced the Elder Council when you were born, nothing I said would have changed Derek's decision. Her jaw was set in the way Mara recognized as the shape of an impossible choice that had already been made and would be made the same way again if it had to be. But more than that. If they had known. If word had gotten out what you were carrying. People would have come for her, Ruth said, finishing the sentence with the directness of someone who had thought this through thoroughly. There are those who understand what ancient wolves are and what they mean. Not just in this territory. The moment that knowledge was made public, Mara would have had no safety. The exile was brutal. But the exile kept her obscure. And obscurity, for those first years, was what I needed, Mara said. She had understood this. Not at 18, not for years afterward. But somewhere in the exile, in the forest, in the long cold nights before her wolf first spoke, she had come to understand that the ancient wolf had needed the hardship. Had needed the exile and the isolation and the complete removal of every structure she'd relied on. A wolf that predated pack life could not fully awaken inside the comfortable weight of pack belonging. It had needed her to be, for a time, entirely alone. The exile made me, Mara said. Not broke me. Made me. Yes, Ruth said simply. Derek had been very quiet. Mara looked at him now, really looked, with the ancient wolf's clarity that let her feel what people carried. She felt his shame. It was not the shame of a man performing remorse for an audience. It was the older, heavier shame of someone who had made an irreversible decision and had then watched its consequences accumulate over 5 years without being able to undo any of them. She also felt something else. Something that made the ancient wolf sharpen with a different quality of attention entirely. Derek, Mara said. The examination. The healers who confirmed the wolfless diagnosis. Tell me who requested it. Derek frowned. It was standard procedure. At manifestation age, any wolf who hasn't shifted is examined by. Who specifically requested the examination for me? By name. A pause. She watched Derek search his memory, and watched the moment he found something he hadn't thought about in 5 years, something that had seemed unremarkable at the time and now, with her ancient wolf's clarity directed at him, suddenly looked very different. Aldrich, Derek said slowly. Aldrich Vane. He came to me 2 weeks before your 18th birthday. Said he'd noticed you hadn't shifted and suggested we conduct the formal examination early, to give you time to prepare, he said. In case the result wasn't. Aldrich Vane, Ruth said, and something in her voice went very still. You know that name, Mara said. Aldrich Vane's grandmother was present at the Elder Council meeting when I presented my documentation about your bloodline, Ruth said. 23 years ago. She was the most vocal opponent. The one who argued most forcefully that I was romanticizing. She looked at Mara steadily. Aldrich Vane grew up knowing what I had found. What I believed. And he would have known, if I was right, what Mara Voss was going to become. The room processed this. He requested the early examination, Mara said, because he needed the wolfless result on record before my wolf had any chance of manifesting. Before anyone could argue the examination was premature. He needed me gone before I became what he knew I would become. The examination was falsified, Zed said from the door. His voice was very quiet. The kind of quiet that was genuinely dangerous. Not falsified, Mara said, working through it as she spoke. The examination was real. An ancient wolf genuinely reads as nothing to a standard healer's test. Aldrich didn't need to falsify anything. He just needed to make sure the examination happened 2 weeks early, before any chance of natural manifestation, and then he needed to make sure the result was acted on immediately. She looked at Derek. He pushed for immediate exile, didn't he? At the council meeting. He was the one who argued against waiting, against any period of observation. Derek's face had gone a particular color. He said delay was weakness. That the pack laws existed for a reason and sentiment shouldn't. He used pack law to remove a threat to himself, Mara said. Using entirely legitimate procedures. Nothing falsified. Nothing illegal. Just a man who understood what I was going to be and moved carefully and early to ensure I was gone before I got there. Silence. Where is Aldrich Vane now? Zed asked. Still in the pack, Derek said. His voice had flattened in a way that told Mara his alpha instincts had just processed the full implication of having harbored, for 5 years, the wolf who had engineered his pack's own decline. He's on the senior council. Has been for 3 years. Mara felt the ancient wolf move through her with something that was not anger. Anger was too simple for what this was. It was more like the sensation of a truth arriving in its complete form after years of existing only partially. The exile had been real. The wolfless diagnosis had been honestly given. But the mechanism that had put her in front of that examination 2 weeks early, with a result ready to be immediately acted upon, that had been deliberate. Careful. The work of someone who had seen her bloodline clearly and decided, long before she was a threat, to eliminate the possibility. He failed, Mara said quietly. Completely, Zed agreed. I want him brought to the Elder Hall, Mara said. Not by force. Not yet. I want him summoned the way the council summons people, formally, procedurally, through proper channels. I want him to walk in expecting a standard meeting and find. She let the ancient wolf rise, just slightly. Enough that everyone in the room felt it. Me. Elder Ruth made a sound that was, unmistakably, the sound of someone who had been right for 23 years and was finally, fully, allowing herself to feel it. Tomorrow, Ruth said. In the Elder Hall. In front of the full council and as many pack members as the hall will hold. She looked at Mara with those sharp, satisfied eyes. Let them all see, at once, what was thrown away. The Elder Hall of Iron Vale Pack had not changed either. It was the oldest building in the territory, dark timber and iron fittings, with a vaulted ceiling that had absorbed decades of difficult conversations and a long central table that had witnessed every significant decision the pack had made in living memory. Pack trials. Alpha challenges. Births registered and deaths recorded. The hall was where Iron Vale conducted its formal business, and it had a particular gravity that even ordinary meetings never fully dispelled. Mara had been in this hall twice in her life before today. Once at age 7, when her mother had been formally recognized as a senior pack member. She remembered the hall as enormous then, the ceiling impossibly high, the table impossibly long, the adults impossibly serious. Once at age 18, when she had stood at the far end of that table and been told she was nothing. She stood at the door now and let herself feel both memories without hurrying past either of them. The ancient wolf waited with her, unhurried, the way it always was. It had been waiting for 23 years. It could wait another moment. Then she walked in. The hall was full. Word had moved through the pack the way word always moved in close communities, fast, imprecise, and impossible to stop. They didn't know the specifics. They knew that Mara Voss had returned. They knew that Alpha Derek had knelt in her mother's house. They knew that Elder Ruth had called a formal council session for this morning and that the Alpha King of all territories was in Iron Vale, which had never happened in the pack's recorded history. They had come to understand what they were dealing with. Mara walked the length of the hall. She did not hurry. She wore no crown, no regalia, nothing that announced rank. Plain clothes, the same ones she'd arrived in. The ancient wolf's presence did all the announcing that needed to be done. She felt it moving ahead of her like a bow wave, felt the pack members on either side responding to it with that same involuntary stillness, that same instinctive orientation. At the far end of the table, in the seat that had been placed there for her, she sat. Zed took the position to her right. Not at the head of the table, that was hers. Beside her. Equal and present and very clearly not the authority in this room, which she suspected was a genuinely new experience for every wolf present. Elder Ruth sat to her left. Derek, visibly diminished from yesterday in the way of men who have slept badly on difficult realizations, took his place mid-table. The senior council filled the remaining seats. The door at the side opened and Aldrich Vane walked in. He was 50, perhaps 55. Well-maintained in the way of wolves who had spent their lives in positions of comfortable authority, not a warrior's body, but the assured solidity of someone who had never needed to fight because he had always found smarter ways to win. He moved through the door with the confident ease of a man responding to a routine council summons, his eyes moving to Derek first, the automatic acknowledgement of his alpha, and then around the table. His eyes found Mara. She watched him process it. Watched the sequence of recognition move through his face, the face she'd never known, the stranger who had calculated her removal before she was old enough to understand she was a threat. He recognized her name, her face, the fact of her return. Then, a half-second later, he felt the ancient wolf. His body responded before his mind could manage it. A slight backward step. The particular tension of a wolf whose instincts had just delivered a message his conscious mind was violently resisting. He recovered quickly. She gave him that, he was practiced at recovery. Mara Voss, he said, finding a pleasant tone with impressive speed. I heard you'd returned. It's been. Sit down, Aldrich, Mara said. Not unkindly. Not with heat. Just with the simple, absolute authority of someone who did not need volume to be heard. He sat. 23 years ago, Mara said, addressing the room rather than Aldrich specifically, Elder Ruth presented documentation to this pack's elder council about my bloodline. She was dismissed. 15 years later, your father's mother was the most vocal voice in that dismissal. Aldrich's jaw tightened. I don't see what my family's position on Ruth's research has to do with. 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, Mara continued, as though he hadn't spoken, you approached Alpha Derek and suggested that my formal manifestation examination be conducted early. You framed it as consideration for my well-being, giving me time to prepare for a potentially difficult result. The hall was very quiet. You knew, Mara said, what an ancient wolf reads as on a standard healer's examination. You knew I would test as wolfless. And you knew that if that result was on record, formally confirmed, acted on immediately, which you also argued for, at the council meeting that followed, I would be gone before any possibility of natural manifestation could complicate the narrative. This is, Aldrich started. I'm not finished, Mara said. He stopped. Through the ancient wolf, she felt the room. Felt every wolf present, their uncertainty, their dawning understanding, the particular quality of a community realizing it has been managed by someone it trusted. She felt Derek's shame deepening as the full picture assembled itself. She felt the senior council members recalibrating in real time. And she felt Aldrich. Clearly, without ambiguity, with the ancient wolf's complete clarity about what people actually carried beneath what they showed. Fear. Old and practiced and very well hidden, but present. The fear of a man who had spent 23 years managing a threat he'd identified early, and who was now sitting across from that threat fully realized, and who understood, with the animal clarity that no amount of practiced composure could suppress, that his management had been entirely insufficient. "You used legitimate procedure," Mara said. "I want to be precise about that. You didn't forge the examination results. You didn't bribe the healers. You simply ensured the examination happened at the moment most likely to confirm the result you needed, and then you advocated for immediate, irreversible action on that result. Everything you did was technically within pack law." A pause. "Which makes it more interesting, not less," Mara said, "because it means this pack's own laws were used as the instrument of my removal. Laws designed to protect the community were deployed to eliminate someone who would have strengthened it. And for 5 years, Iron Veil has been declining, slowly, consistently, in ways that your healers and your strategists haven't been able to explain, because what was sustaining it was removed." She let the ancient wolf fill the room fully, completely, without restraint. Not the partial surface of yesterday. The full depth of it, 5 years of forged strength, of exile and isolation, and the ancient wolf finding its complete form in the absence of everything that might have made it comfortable and therefore smaller. Every wolf in the hall felt it. She heard the sounds of chairs shifting, of involuntary breath, of bodies responding before minds caught up. At the far end of the table, Aldrich's composure finally broke. Not dramatically. Just a trembling in his hands that he couldn't quite suppress, his wolf responding to the ancient wolf with the helpless recognition of something that had spent 23 years afraid of exactly this. "The pack law regarding harm through deliberate procedural manipulation is clear," Elder Ruth said, from Mara's left. She had a document open in front of her, of course she did. "It applies regardless of whether individual procedures were followed correctly, if the intent and outcome can be demonstrated to have caused material harm to pack members and pack integrity. The exile of a wolf whose removal demonstrably weakened the pack constitutes such harm." "I did what I believed was necessary," Aldrich said. His voice had lost its pleasantness entirely. "An ancient wolf in a pack structure is destabilizing. Uncontrollable. The historical record." "The historical record," Ruth said, "describes ancient wolves as the strongest stabilizing force a pack can carry. The destabilization you feared was destabilization of your own position. Not the pack's." Silence. Mara looked at him. Felt his fear. Felt, beneath it, something she hadn't expected, the exhaustion of a man who had spent 23 years carrying the weight of a preemptive strike against a child, telling himself it was strategy, telling himself it was necessary, and finding that the justification had grown heavier, not lighter, with time. She did not feel sorry for him. But she felt the full, complete truth of him, and it was more pathetic than it was monstrous, and she found that somehow worse. "You will resign from the senior council," Mara said. "Effective today. You will make a full accounting of your actions to this council and to the pack record, not a version, not an interpretation, the complete account, including your knowledge of my bloodline and your deliberate engineering of the early examination. That account will be preserved in the pack archive alongside Elder Ruth's original documentation." She paused. "And you will live in this pack, with this record, for as long as you choose to remain here. Not exiled. Present. Because exile," she said, and the ancient wolf carried the word through the hall with absolute clarity, "is too easy. Exile lets people forget. The pack should remember." The hall was completely still. Then, from somewhere in the assembled pack members, someone began to strike the table. Once. The traditional pack acknowledgement, not applause, something older. A second wolf joined. Then a third. Then the sound filled the hall, rhythmic and building, the pack's oldest way of saying, "This is right. We witness this. This stands." Aldrich looked at the table. At his hands. At the record that was going to follow him for the rest of his life. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Afterward, when the hall had partially emptied and the formal session had closed, Jade found her. She was waiting outside, had not come into the hall, which Mara noted. Waiting in the cold air of the courtyard with her hands folded and her eyes direct in the way of someone who has rehearsed several versions of a conversation and then discarded all of them. Mara stopped. You don't have to, Jade said immediately. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that I think about it. The ceremony. Every day since. Her voice was steady but her scent told a different story, the particular distress of genuine guilt that had had 5 years to compound. I looked at the ground because I couldn't look at you. I told myself that made it better. It didn't. Mara looked at her former best friend. Let the ancient wolf feel what Jade actually carried. Genuine. All of it. Not performance, not self-preservation dressed as remorse. Just a woman who had made a coward's choice at 18 and had been living with it in full ever since. I know, Mara said. I'm sorry, Jade said. Not because of what you are. Because of who you were. My friend. And I looked at the ground. Mara was quiet for a moment. I'm not ready to be your friend again, she said. I don't know if I'll get there. But I believe you. And I'm not carrying what you did as something I'm unwilling to ever put down. She held Jade's eyes. That's what I can give you today. Jade nodded. Her eyes were bright. That's more than I came here to ask for. I know, Mara said. And walked back inside. The conversation about the pack's future happened the morning after the Elder Hall. Not a formal session. Just Mara, Derek, Elder Ruth, and Cora, who had insisted on being present and whom nobody had been willing to argue with, at the kitchen table in the small house at the edge of the territory, with tea going warm in their hands and the particular quality of light that came after a difficult thing had been done and the world had not ended. Derek looked like a man who had been taken apart and was not yet certain how he fit back together. Mara had some sympathy for that. Not the kind that absolved him, the kind that recognized a human experience happening inside a complicated person. The bloodline question, Ruth said, without preamble, spreading documents across the table. Mara's mother's line. I should have raised this 5 years ago and I didn't, because I was a coward about it and I am not being a coward about it now. What bloodline question? Mara said. Your mother's grandmother was Alpha of Iron Vale, Ruth said. Before Derek's father. The line passed sideways rather than directly due to a contested succession, which is a story for another time, but the direct Alpha bloodline of this pack runs through Cora. Which means it runs through you. Mara looked at her mother. Cora looked at her tea. You knew this, Mara said. I knew it was possible, Cora said carefully. The succession was disputed. It was never formally. The formal records are here, Ruth said, tapping the documents. I have had them for 40 years. I did not present them during the succession dispute because I was 23 years old and genuinely frightened of the politics involved. I am 83 now and considerably less frightened. So Mara has a rightful claim to Alpha of Iron Vale, Derek said. His voice carried no resistance. Just the flat acknowledgement of a man following a set of facts to their conclusion. She has the strongest possible claim, Ruth said. Bloodline through her mother, Ancient Wolf, and the mate bond to the Alpha King. There is not a wolf court in any territory that would argue against it. Everyone looked at Mara. Mara looked at the documents. At the pack outside the window, she could feel it through the Ancient Wolf, the bond that had been shifting toward her since she arrived, warmer now than it had been in years, something in it that felt like relief. Like a community that had been holding its breath and had finally, fractionally, begun to let it out. She thought about what it would mean to stay. To take the Alpha seat she had been born for, that had been deliberately taken from her before she was old enough to reach it. To rebuild this pack from the inside, with the Ancient Wolf and Zed's authority and Elder Ruth's 60 years of careful documentation. She thought about the 5 years she had spent becoming someone who did not need this pack's recognition to know what she was. I'm not taking the Alpha seat, she said. Ruth blinked. Derek looked up. Cora, Mara noticed, did not look surprised. My mother will, Mara said. The kitchen was very quiet. Cora is the direct bloodline, Mara continued. She is the one who stayed. Who endured 5 years of diminished rank without leaving, without breaking, without doing anything other than continuing to tend her window box and repair her own front step because she was not going to give this pack the satisfaction of watching her deteriorate. She looked at her mother, who was looking at the table with the careful stillness of someone not trusting their own face right now. She was stripped of rank when I was exiled. That rank will be restored, not to what it was. To what it should have been all along. Alpha, Ruth said softly. Almost to herself. Then, with the satisfaction of a woman whose 60 years of careful work were arriving at their purpose, Alpha Cora. Cora looked up. Her eyes were bright and she was doing something with her jaw that Mara recognized as her mother's particular method of refusing to cry in front of people. I'm too old, Cora said. You're 61, Ruth said. I'm 83 and I've been running this pack's historical record since before you were born. Don't talk to me about too old. Derek said, quietly, I'll support it. Formally. Whatever transition the pack law requires, I'll facilitate it. He paused. It's the least of what I owe. Yes, Mara said. Not unkindly. It is. The formal transition would take weeks, documents, ceremonies, the careful procedural work that pack law required for a succession. But the substance of it was decided at that kitchen table, over warm tea, with the morning light coming through the window of the smallest house in the territory. Mara's mother would lead the pack that had stripped her of rank. That was the shape of justice that felt true. The mating ceremony happened 3 days later. Not because it had to, the bond between Mara and Zed had been complete for over a year, in every way that mattered. But Zed had asked her, 6 months ago, where she wanted the ceremony to be. Had said, anywhere. Whatever you want. And she had thought about it for 6 months and had finally understood her own answer. Here. In the territory that called her nothing. In the courtyard of the pack that sent her away. With her mother watching from the front and elder Ruth sitting beside her and the wolves who had stepped aside without knowing why lining the square that had once been the site of her humiliation. Not as a statement. As a completion. The square had been the place where one story ended. It should be the place where the next one started. Zed had simply said, yes. And arranged the rest. The morning of the ceremony, Mara stood at her mother's window and looked out at the courtyard being prepared below, wolves setting up the traditional markers, the fire that would burn through the ceremony, the gathered pack finding their places with the particular solemnity of a community that understood it was witnessing something that would be in their pack record for generations. Her mother came to stand beside her. You could have taken the alpha seat, Cora said. I know. You chose not to. I chose you, Mara said simply. And I chose the thing I already built. I don't need what was taken from me. I made something better. Cora put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. They stood there for a moment, the two of them, looking at the courtyard below, the square where Mara had been told she was nothing and where she was about to stand and claim everything. Your father would have loved this, Cora said quietly. Tell me about him later, Mara said. When there's time. There will be time, Cora said. Now that you're not running anymore. The ceremony itself was both less and more than Mara had expected. Less theatrical than the exile had been, no crowd appetite, no ceremony of rejection. Just the old words, the fire, the gathered pack, and Zed across from her with that dark, steady gaze that had been the first thing in 5 years of exile to feel like something she could stop moving for. When she spoke the words that completed the mating bond formally, she felt the ancient wolf respond, not with the urgency of something claiming, but with the deep, unhurried satisfaction of something that had been waiting patiently for this specific moment and found it exactly as it should be. And when Zed spoke his words, the alpha king of all territories, the most powerful wolf alive, binding himself to the mate whose wolf was older than all of it, she felt him mean every syllable with the simple, total completeness of a person who had made a decision and was done revising it. Then she raised her head. And the ancient wolf howled. It was not a sound Mara produced. It moved through her, from somewhere below language, below thought, from the oldest part of what she carried, and it left her and it crossed the courtyard and it climbed and it reached and it spread over the territory of Iron Veil Pack in a wave that every wolf within range felt in their bones before they heard it with their ears. The response was immediate and involuntary and complete. Every wolf in the territory answered. Not a mating howl. Not a pack acknowledgement, the way wolves responded to their alpha's call. Something older, the ancient, inherited memory of wolf nature responding to the thing that had existed before all the structures and ranks and laws they'd built on top of it. The first wolves, calling back to one of their own. The sound lasted a long time. It moved outward from Iron Vale into the surrounding territories and was heard in 4 other packs before it faded, and wolves in those territories stopped what they were doing and looked at each other and did not have words for what they had felt. In the courtyard of Iron Vale, in the silence after the howl settled, Zed looked at Mara with the expression he reserved for moments when he was feeling something too large for his customary economy of words. "Mara," he said. "I know," she said. He smiled. The full version, not the slight curve he deployed in ordinary circumstances, but the real one, the one she had spent 2 years earning and never took for granted. "Your mother is crying," he said. "She'll deny it," Mara said. "I know," he said. "It's very endearing." She laughed. And the ancient wolf, settled and warm and fully home in a way it had never been before, laughed with her. Later, much later, after the ceremony had ended and the fire had burned low and the pack had dispersed into the particular warm noise of a community that had processed something significant and was now feeding itself and telling the story back to itself in smaller groups, Mara stood at the gate. The same gate she had walked out of at 18 with one bag and the sound of a pack's indifference at her back. She stood in it for a long moment. Not going through it. Just standing in it. Feeling the territory behind her and everything beyond it ahead and the ancient wolf quiet and present in her chest, neither pushing forward nor pulling back. Zed came to stand beside her. He looked at the gate. Then at her. "Ready?" he said. She thought about everything that word contained. The girl who had walked out of this gate with nothing. The years of exile that had been brutal and necessary and formative in ways she was still discovering. The ancient wolf that had been waiting inside her since before she was born, patient as stone, certain as water, needing only the right conditions to become what it had always been. She thought about her mother, who would stand in the alpha seat that had always been hers. About Elder Ruth, who had been right for 60 years and had finally, completely been heard. About Jade, in the courtyard, telling the truth she didn't have to tell. About Aldrich Vane, who would spend the rest of his life living inside the record of what he'd done. She thought about Zed, beside her, who had found her in a forest and recognized what she was before she fully did and had done nothing but wait. She had walked out of this gate with nothing. She walked back in with everything. And now she was walking out again, not running, not fleeing, not carrying the weight of a rejection that had been meant to define her. Walking out by choice, back toward the life she had built, the life she had chosen, the life that no one had given her because no one could give her what she had made herself. "Ready," Mara said. The gate closed behind them. And the ancient wolf, fully awake and fully home in the body that had been born to carry it, was already thinking about what came next. If this story found you somewhere real, if Mara's walk back through that gate, by choice, moved something in you, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment and tell me what this story meant to you. Tell me the moment that stayed. Tell me if you've ever been told you were nothing by someone who had no idea what they were looking at. Because those comments are the reason this channel exists, and I read every single one, and they matter more than you know. Since you made it all the way here and you are still not subscribed, please. Right now. It is free, it costs you nothing, and it means every story I make finds you automatically. Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and come back for the next one. I will see you there, beautiful souls.